Hola, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a este nuevo programa de la Cumbre de Bienestar Integral. Hoy tenemos con nosotros a Terry Patten, querido amigo. Voy a leer la biografía de Terry antes de que empecemos a conversar con él. Terry nació en 1951 cerca de Chicago, Illinois, y cuando tenía 6 años, su familia se trasladó a una cooperativa comunitaria en George Center, una comunidad intencional fundada por miembros de la Iglesia de los Hermanos, cuya idea era que invitaban a todas las razas y religiones a convivir como testimonio de paz y hermandad. Después de esta experiencia comunitaria, cuando empezó a estudiar, él se licenció magna cum laude en la Universidad de Michigan Ann Arbor, donde recibió 3 premios, los premios Hopwood, por sus trabajos de ficción y poesía. En 1973 conoció a Adida, un maestro espiritual estadounidense, un maestro brillante y algo controvertido, y vivió con él por 15 años como devoto formal en el ashram, donde fue coautor de un libro que hizo Adida y Saniel Bonder, que se llama Garbage and the Goddess, La basura y la diosa. Y también sirvió como editor de revistas de Down Horse, Vision Mound y The Laughing Man. Cuando Terry se retiró de esta comunidad en 1988, fundó una empresa que se llama Herramientas para la Exploración, que ahora todavía existe y se llama Herramientas para Bienestar. Lo que esta empresa hacía era que reunía en este mismo lugar todas las máquinas de cerebro-mente que estaban empezando a emerger, herramientas para la energía sutil y otras tecnologías de vanguardia para expandir la conciencia. Terry a su vez codiseñó algunas de estas herramientas de biorretroalimentación, grabaciones psicoacústicas, libros y artículos sobre la reducción de estrés y de rendimiento máximo y para la reeducación neurodesarrollo. Después de 10 años de tener esta empresa, él la vendió y se dedicó a otras cosas. Básicamente durante unos años fue codirector de empresas dedicadas al ambiente climático y a la ecología, una de las cuales, que se llama Old Grow Again, lo viejo puede volver a crecer, todavía funciona como un modelo económico de la silvicultura sostenible del árbol de la secoya, de esos grandes árboles. Luego Terry pasó a ser profesor asociado del Instituto Integral, fundado por Ken Wilber. Y allí trabajó con Ken Wilber por muchos años y desarrolló lo que se llama la práctica de vida integral, y escribió un libro de este mismo título con Ken Wilber, Marco Morelli y otros autores. Terry también tiene un máster en estudios de conciencia de la Universidad John F. Kennedy, y en su tesis él analizó cómo se pueden fomentar niveles superiores de conciencia mediante el coaching integral. También formó parte del programa docente de liderazgo ejecutivo integral de la Escuela de Administración Mendoza de la Universidad de Notre Dame, en donde él diseñó e impartió este programa, que es un programa para desatar el potencial del liderazgo. Ha sido también profesor en la Universidad de Columbia, en la Universidad Estatal de San Francisco y en la Universidad John F. Kennedy. Además de eso, fue seleccionado como una persona para viajar a Irán con una delegación diplomática estadounidense, en la cual la idea era que él escribiría un blog sobre este viaje y reflexionaría sobre la dinámica problemática de la relación entre los Estados Unidos e Irán, de donde se veían múltiples perspectivas y múltiples niveles, y ayudaba a canalizar el diálogo entre las dos entidades a través de la teoría integral. En el 2007 Terry se dedicó a crear una nueva empresa que se llamaba El Corazón Integral, que ahora existe como integralheart.com y se transformó a terrypatten.com. donde se pueden encontrar en este sitio. Terry tiene videos, audios, artículos, entradas, blog, todo enfocado a cómo vivir con una mente, un corazón, un cuerpo y un alma integrales. Y al mismo tiempo participa plenamente en la comunidad integral y en el desarrollo de la vida integral. Terry ha escrito un tercer libro muy importante que se llama Una nueva república del corazón, que es el espíritu para los revolucionarios, una guía para el trabajo, para el cambio holístico, que fue publicado por North Atlantic Books, una editorial muy importante en el 2018. Terry ahora viaja mucho, dando charlas, enseñando, consultando y desafiando y conectándose a líderes de instituciones del mundo y presentando una línea de seminarios que se llama Más allá del despertar, el futuro de la práctica espiritual, que es un seminario que nosotros tenemos el orgullo de presentar en la vida integral en una traducción completa en español, y va a ser uno de nuestros principales productos, la práctica espiritual de vida integral. Entonces ahora, sin más, quiero presentar a Terry y tener una charla con él. Muchas gracias. So Terry, thank you very much. I just switched from Spanish after introducing you. Thank you very much for being here. And what we're going to talk about is your course, Práctica Integral de Vida Espiritual, Integral Spiritual Practice. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what was your main intention when you created this course?
Well, I was aware that the versions of integral practice that I had been able to communicate through the book that I co-wrote with Ken Wilber and Marco Morelli and Adam Leonard were valuable and legitimate and important in various ways, but they weren't as deep as the transformation that really produces spiritual wisdom, and that I wanted a way to convey a true transformation of the whole being. Mm-hmm. And this isn't, it's not unidimensional, but there were a whole variety of dimensions of what's central to integral practice as I do it, and as I had begun to teach it, that were not contained in anything that had been made available in the public previously. So as you may know, I helped create Integral Life Practice with Ken and our team at Integral Institute, Jeff Salzman, Diane, various wonderful people. And then I was privileged to teach a series of seminars in Colorado with Ken and the team. And then I was able to help create the Integral Life Practice Starter Kit, which helped institute it a little bit more clearly and fully, and then co-write the book, Integral Life Practice. And then I taught it for quite a while. I think I taught it for 7 years or something at the time I created this course. And as I taught it, I discovered that, oh, this is important. We have to bring this in too. There were elements of what it really takes to have a lived, full transformation of the being that needed to be incorporated. And so things had evolved enough that I had a lot more to say. So this course was a way for me to really be as generous as possible. And as you're aware, it's really an enormously rich course. It has an awful lot of different dimensions. It has the 8 sessions, it has guided meditations, it has handouts, it has tools. It really is a rich resource. So I felt excited to be able to give the really serious person who might encounter this somewhere far away from where I live and who might need to practice it on their own, everything they needed to really make that transition from being a seeker to a practitioner, to really become somebody who, as I think, I forget who it was who said it, do I believe in God? No, I know God. You know, that this residing in capital R reality can become our experience. And from that, we can really be a practitioner in a whole different way and deepen and deepen and deepen in our relationship with the ineffable, but also transform all the functions of our lives and really become different kinds of people in our relationships and work and everything else.
Yeah. So what I was thinking, in order for our audience to understand what the course is, I wanted to go maybe like if you do like a cliff notes of each one of the modules. I think that would be so. You will start by teaching us that there should be a daily practice, and that daily practice kind of need some secrets to be able to make it happen in our life. So maybe we can start there. What would be the motivation to have a daily practice, and what are like cliff notes of the secrets to start that daily practice?
Well, many people decide to become a practitioner and they make very ambitious commitments, they think, and then they can't sustain those commitments. And what I noticed really made the difference were a few key elements that I gave names starting with an M. And the first one, and probably the single most important and universal, I mean, this is true in almost any kind of serious spiritual practice, is what I call mornings practice. That means a daily practice of meditation or prayer, essentially sitting in silence and deepening in awareness and consciousness for at least a short period of time, perhaps much longer, and a period of conscious movement, because this is an embodied, we're embodied beings. Our practice has to be lived in an embodied way, and conscious movement is a part of any serious practice. Then moments. Well, as you begin to have a different intuition of the heart of the mystery in this moment and every moment, you can awaken back into that. And there are other things, like maybe it's really important for you to do a postural practice and you just shift your posture. But there are all kinds of things that we can interrupt our unconscious momentum and perform as a practice. And I call those moments practices. We just do them in a moment or two. Maybe we take some deep feeling breaths. Heart breathing is a practice I like to emphasize, breathing to and from the heart in a deep way. So that's mornings and moments. And then there's really all of this is for some sense of purpose, right? There's something that's magnetizing us. There's a true north that we are evolving toward. We're here for a reason. And that, in a sense, is our mission. And so clarifying your mission and refining it, and it does evolve over time or get nuanced. So mission is another dimension, and being really aligned to that true north of your mission. But we don't just do that in a big abstract sense about your mission. You do it through the projects that you undertake in your life. And we all undertake countless projects. Maybe we write a book or create a website or a course or get a degree or build a lasting relationship or raise a child or start a garden, or there are all kinds of things that can be a project that you undertake with in order to be of service and with awareness that it is a practice and that the person who finishes it will have evolved. It won't be the same as the person who began. So you're doing it in a transformational spirit, and you're doing it in partnership with grace, with a greater power. And that makes it what I call a milestones practice. So that's the fourth M. And then the last M is momentum. And I just used one word to describe what is the whole focus of the Integral Life Practice book, which are the modules of the practice, or what I prefer to call the spheres, because they're not just like our practice is a project of self-improvement and it has these modules, but no, our whole lives are practice, and there are all these different spheres of activity in our lives. And so it's important that we have spiritual practices and mental practices and physical practices and psycho-spiritual practices, working with shadow and soul and all kinds of dimensions of our interiority, and many other spheres of our lives. Work is a domain of practice. Our intimate relationships are a domain of practice. And really, there are many. But as we grow, we begin to realize life is a school, and every aspect of life is a practice. And then there's a little bit of a, I don't know, something a little clunky about just breaking it into parts and knowing the parts.
Yeah.
Because ultimately you bring them back together and you have an integrated life of practice that moves through all the spheres of your activity. And you're always learning and you're always growing and you're always willing to discover how, because you know, it's said, Donald Hebb, famous saying in neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together. So we're always practicing something. And we're very often practicing boredom or distraction or fretfulness or irritation or whatever. We just become more prone to be that way in some future moment. Whereas if we recognize each moment as a moment of practice, we make a more conscious choice. And we engage the moment in a way that builds these grooves, these patterns into our very neurology, so that we become more conscious and more creative and generous, and all kinds of virtues. Pretty much every virtue is cultivated in the life of practice.
Yeah. So it's beautiful. These M practices, the morning, the movement, the motivation, milestones, etc. What I see is that you go to a place that there's another section in which you call it the impulse. In Spanish is impulso imparable. This is an impulse that once you get there, it becomes something that comes from inside you. So as we practice, that's something that happens in us. Talk us about that impulse that begins to change who we were by something that is emerging. Because you talk about emergence and you talk about in the next chapter about evolution. But I think that the main entrance to this concept of emergence and evolution is the fact that it's an impulse that it becomes liberated inside of you, that was there already, comes liberated by these practices. Talk us about that impulse, please.
Well, this whole matter of approaching life as a school and a practice opportunity and all the rest actually creates changes, and you become a more healthy, conscious, loving, intelligent, creative, contributing person in pretty much every way. And even a little bit of progress along that way is so self-validating, so self-confirming. You realize, oh, I like to be this. And that just gives you an inherent awareness. I want to keep doing that. I want to even do it better. I want to grow in my ability to grow. And that self-reinforcing cycle
Yeah.
powers our motivation really powerfully.
In Then you introduce the concept of evolution. How do you see evolution, and how these practices and themselves have evolved through time? Would you explain a little bit about that and what you look into that section that you talk about evolution in the course?
Well, for one thing, this is our origin story. How did we get here? We evolved. And what that implies is that everything is a process. Our minds tend to reify things. I'm a somebody, you're a somebody else. There's this object and that object. Everything is separate, everything is discrete. But over time, everything is changing and evolving, and so profoundly. And this, well, depending on how we think of it, 14 billion or 3+ billion years of evolution on this beautiful earth are a story of incredible glory, of really just, I like to paraphrase Brian Swim. He said, if you leave hydrogen and helium alone long enough, eventually they become jungles and antelopes, and they become apes, and then they write symphonies and they build cathedrals and they put telescopes into orbit and they look back at the whole universe and they wonder about the meaning of it all. I mean, that is a story of miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. If we're really rooted in the actuality of what our hard-headed scientists say about how we got here, we're participating in a miracle, and we too are part of that evolutionary process. We are a process, and everything is always potentially changing. And that's both a source of wonder and amazement, and then it's also like an invitation to creative collaboration with the greater evolutionary process. It's sort of the greatest story ever told, but it's also like, hey, want to play? And so it draws us into the life of practice in a whole being fashion.
Yeah. Now, as we practice and get to that point and we establish our practice, there is a feeling, you talk in this in the fourth week, of you call it absolute freedom. It's something inside of us that opens into knowing exactly what freedom means, which you clearly say that is not freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom to enjoy, freedom to talk about this freedom that we find as we practice.
Well, in a way, every moment of practice is freeing up your energy and freeing up your attention from bound patterns. We all have habits. We all have unconscious patterns that we have absorbed from our parents and society, and even from our own karmas. And as soon as you begin to free up that energy and attention, there's more and more free awareness. Now, one of the things that we awaken to in the midst of this is the radiant, the glorious, the free, the wondrous, the incredibly good, we can say divine nature of reality. It's all right here in this present moment. And when we get released into this present moment in a way that really is beyond our concepts, it's not our ideas of God or ideas of freedom. It's just, wow, we have these moments that sometimes are given by grace. Some people will experience them through the help of a psychedelic drug. And that experience of that new level of freedom is a transmission of our real state, our real condition, our actual, what's real. It's more real than anything else. And in that, suddenly you really are, in a more radical sense, free. You're not building incremental levels of free energy and free attention as you do with your gradual path practices.
Mm-hmm.
This is the sudden experience of full, true awakening, which is, both are necessary parts of the path. But when this happens, there's a different kind of knowing. And in that absolute freedom, this is what people talk about in enlightenment teachings. This is the goal of the path. But you really kind of have to get to the place where there's some real sense of that, and that you can then reawaken to it with, you don't have to discover it or get, take drugs all the time, or you don't have to achieve it in those ways. It informs you. You are practicing what has now become combined with your own very being. And then you act from a different kind of freedom. And in a way, very often, instead of it being, oh, what do I want to do? Do I want this or this or this or this? The way the separate individual interprets freedom. And you wake up to, what's really true and important. And I have sometimes joked, you awaken from the tyranny of doing whatever you want to the freedom of doing what you must. And what you must becomes whatever it is that is true. And you become, in a way, lived by that divine reality that is your true nature. Yeah. And that's exhilarating, because you're really out of the way when that happens completely. There's no ego involved.
Yeah, I want to touch on that a little bit more. We're practicing this. We're living in a practical world. Most people live in a practical world. And as you do these practices, you discover this, what you say. I mean, we discover that there is a God, we can call it, or something like that. We start getting in touch with that. And there's some kind of intuition that there's a higher way to be in this world, which is living from instead of living towards. And then you kind of introduce there the concept of God, but you talk about God in first, second, and third person. Can you talk a little bit about what that means? What is that?
Yeah, that's a really important idea that I was really lucky to be working pretty closely with Ken at the time when he got that intuition about that important first person, second person, third person spirituality being fundamental. And he was calling it the 1, 2, 3 of God. I suggested we call it the 3 faces of God instead. And essentially, this awakening, you awaken as that, the I amness of everything. You're not separate from anything. So that intuitive unity with all things that you might achieve in a moment of meditation begins to seep into your daily experience a little bit. And this I amness begins to inform your whole life. That is first person spirituality, where you awaken as that I amness. Then I always find it more useful to not go to second, but go to third person, because in third person, we look at the qualities of the divine through one of its forms, either sensate forms, and usually that takes the form of nature mysticism, seeing the divine in the beauty of this amazing world and letting that be a transmission of intimacy with all of the qualities of the mystery and how glorious it is, or in what are more philosophical, in interior ways, what's more intuitive than sensate, where we wake up to some, like this pattern of talking about the first, second, and third person of God, or the five M's, or any of these things. When you have an aha experience and somehow reality becomes a little bit more vivid to you, that's a spiritual practice. And it comes from looking at something in terms of distinctions and intuitive insight through philosophy, theology, whatever. Those are the two main ways most of us experience third person spirituality. Many, many people today have a more complex experience to second person spirituality because theistic religions have had such an influence over our world. In the Western Hemisphere, Christianity primarily.
Yes.
And there's been something inculcated in everyone that was binding, because there was a concept of who God was, like the bearded guy on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel or something, that was essentially mythic in its nature. And as we began to evolve and our consciousness began to evolve and we began to become just more in we evolved through the different levels of cultural evolution beyond the mythic level. We kind of had to push off from that, reject it, and it tended to give us allergies to all that. So this, oh dear God, I pray, just sort of begins to feel like, oh no, I don't do that. On the other hand, intimacy with that which is the very nature of all things is a fundamental dimension of spirituality. We are relational beings. We evolved, our whole nervous systems evolved to relate to others. For us to have a spirituality that's only first person and only third person is essentially to leave that relational nervous system completely out of our spiritual practice.
Yeah.
You have to be able to have, in a sense, a love affair with, with the divine, but it's not with your idea of something in particular that's the divine. It's with the unknowable divine. And yet, this is your deepest intimacy. This is the one who's been with you since before your birth and in every moment of your lifetime. This is the source of grace. This is, your beloved, your capital B beloved. So that second person spirituality needs to be reclaimed, liberated from those mythic forms, and discovered as a source of constant grace so that we can turn to the mystery of existence. And it has a second person dimension. Oh, in some sense, there's a thank you, and then there's a please. We all want for there to be grace informing our life experience. And there's also a willingness to be of service, to be the hands and feet of that one. Use me, oh Lord, kind of thing. And that second person dimensionality is often a big breakthrough where we reclaim it in a whole new form. And then being able to very naturally participate in all three faces of God in our, and sometimes we call it the three faces of spirit or the three faces of the mystery. People have their own reactivities to various names for the divine, but it's inherent in awakening and love and service and conscious life.
There's so many ways I would like to go here, but first of all, we're talking to audiences that are basically Catholic audiences, and most of Latin American people are, and they already have an idea of what that relations, the second person is, and that's always mediated by the church and that type of thing. What I heard you saying is that there are ways or there are levels. You talk about changes, you talk about mythic. I'm not sure most people understand what that means. So people have a way to relate to God in second person. Maybe first person and third person are new concepts for them, but this is what they deal with all the time. So the course will help them to change their relationship with that second person. What are you?
It will help them to free it from some of the limitations that have been attached to it. To some degree, I think that very often, if you're raised in a traditional religious culture, your relationship to God is a little like if you've ever seen an illustrated copy of Gulliver's Travels when he was in Lilliput. Yeah. There's this giant who's bound to the earth by hundreds of little threads that these little guys have tied him to. And there's a little bit of a way of the sleeping giant awakening and liberating itself from all of the things that were limiting. But very often, see, God is inherent. The divine is inherent. Devotion is inherent. Awe is inherent. And very often, through the church, people have had really important, sacred, valid experiences of the divine. You don't have to throw any of that away.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, you don't have to throw anything away. What you have to do, though, is to find your way to a genuine, enduring, free relationship that's not always mediated by others. You don't have to look in the Bible or ask the priest or, whatever it is. It may be enriching for you to go into the cathedral and feel the grandeur of the cathedral as a part of your life. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have a direct relationship with that second person divine, and you're awakening to the fact, and the church doesn't know about this, that one fully realized is the I amness of every conscious being, human and more than human, in this whole world, that this is a divine domain, and that intimacy with life is intimacy with God in this universal way. And this re-universalizing of your practice frees up the heart and your intelligence and discernment and all kinds of things.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit repetitious what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it in a different way. So in a way, in the course, and you're just opening a door for us human beings learning these things to have a direct connection without intermediaries, without being intermediated, with that thing that we have placed the word God, but it's a deep intuition inside of us. So I know you talk about, but I would love for you to expand a little bit of that freedom to have your direct relationship. And if you want to use the word devotion, because I think that's a very, very important thing, especially for the culture of Catholics that are so steeped into the fear of God and that you have to be mediated. and you're opening a new door. So talk a little bit about that, please.
Well, there's an appropriate function that fear of God kind of can play in a certain moral universe. We should all be humble in relationship to karmas. But God is not angry. God is love and awareness and grace and freedom and wonder. God is glorious, and we can have a relationship with God that unfolds more and more deeply over time, in which whatever feels really deeply true to you about the God of your childhood religion doesn't have to be thrown away, but more and more you can get to know God better. You can get to know God better and then better and then better. That's what I'm doing at this stage of my life. That most important thing, the thing that's right at the center of everything, is this allowing what is already a very full and happy apprehension of the divine to deepen and expand and show itself more and more fully. We can do that until we're gone and perhaps beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, and from there, in the last part of the course, you start taking it down basically to emotional intelligence, relationships, and finally, if you're an integrated human being, what is your service in the world, and the importance of the other, because that's where you demonstrate who you are. So if you want to go through that, I mean, we can go, you can talk about the emotional. Let's talk about the emotional part and how emotionally in relationships, but also the inner emotions that you need to be on purpose, which is where you start in the 6th week of the course. You go into that very deeply.
Well, even though many times the blocks that we encounter seem like they're out there, very often what's holding us back is an emotional problem. We all have little ways that we defend our current way of being. We defend our little sacred cows or attachments or what we learned from our parents or whatever it is. We're attached in a whole variety of ways. And so freeing up those bound emotions and waking up to the particular places that we were traumatized and the shadows, emotional shadows that Jung talked about, and in a way reclaiming more and more space in which we can be fully conscious. That's essential in our growth. But then as we are living a life of practice, we're inspired to, well, for one thing, we feel love, and then we want to help. We want to make a difference. We want to be of benefit. And as we bring our life energy into the world and we find our mission and we do our milestones projects, we encounter other people and we encounter, in our families, everywhere else. And there tend to be little bound patterns in almost every relational dynamic where we can be more conscious, less attached, more generous, more creative, more skilled. And so our emotional practice spills over into our relational practices, and they make a huge difference in our ability to be effective in our practical work in the world as well.
Yeah. I think one of the beautiful things that you also introduced there is that, in a way, which is sometimes for a lot of people, it's like a big news, is that you can decide, you can choose your emotional state. That's not something that a lot of people are clear, but if you're going to this course and you have been doing some practice, you have created some kind of space between like one word that we have mentioned here, the ego, if you want to talk about that. And the fact that there is some capacity to choose, because there's another part of us that it's pure, it's in contact, that we already saw that we had that experience. And coming from there, we can choose, and that choice makes us grow, and makes us more open to other people. And talk about that a little bit, please.
Well, that's essentially the essential thing that opens up as practice creates more free attention, more free awareness, more free energy. We're no longer whatever it is we're dealing with, we have no perspective on it. We just, it's right there but we have a little more free attention, a little more awareness that's not bound in some unconscious reactive pattern. And that little bit of distance is the space in which we can make an intelligent choice. And as we practice, and we have this really virtuous, self-reinforcing cycle of healthy choices, making us people we like better, and making us happier, and we have freer attention. As that all builds, there's more and more healthy choice that we're able to make. Now, it's important to mention something else. That's true, and that's a description of how practice grows. And it's always like, oh, I make the choice to practice, at first just maybe a little bit, and I'm mostly making unconscious choices. So we have to forgive ourselves for the fact that we're not perfect practitioners. And after a while, maybe it's I practice in 2 moments and I'm reactive and unconscious in 1. But we've got to not be egoically attached to our practice. That's what's called spiritual materialism. There has to be free attention, free awareness, and choice in relationship to our whole relationship with ourselves. And we have to become our own friends in order to be friends to one another. And that's an aspect of what is touched on in the Course as well.
Okay. So Terry, yeah, that was beautiful. I just want to also try to close, and there are 2 aspects that I want to bring up. One is, given the fact of impermanence and mortality, a person that comes out of this course, what is the practical, what do you expect them to do? What is the practical thing? And it was mentioned that also this course has a community support in Facebook. So I have the testimony of Lynn that many years after taking your course, they're still in touch with people. So let's talk about those 2 aspects. First of all, address a little bit the impermanence and how this comes into practice, and then what do you expect in the community aspect?
Okay, well, I talk about the lesson of life and death, the fact that we all die and that everything dies, even natural phenomena, a river may die, or, things pass over time. And the optical illusion in which most people live is of immortality. I kind of feel as if I'm never going to die. Everybody else does. We say we know we're going to die, but our feeling being doesn't let it in. And very wonderful and famous book by Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death, kind of reorganizes all of Freudian psychology. Instead of repressing the sexual impulse, he says what we're really repressing is our negation in our death. And so there's a very often people are jolted into a very committed spiritual practice by a brush with their death or the death of someone close to them, or maybe a series of deaths that are near them. And therefore death is an important teacher, but it's also what we're preparing for. In a way, it's said that meditation is a rehearsal for death. And certainly that encounter with a terminal diagnosis or the nearness of death to someone very, very important to us draws us into a moment in which that optical illusion is penetrated. And we have an opportunity to have maybe a new and different relationship in which suddenly the preciousness of this moment, all we have is this moment and this moment. The mystery of the moment, it's like, oh, and am I living on the surface? Yeah. Is there something deeper? Yeah. Is there something richer, more happy, more profound? Yeah. All enjoyment, all wonder, all beauty, all love. It's all right here. And we let that lesson of mortality wake us up to being alive. That's why it's the lesson of life and death. Death is what opens us to life very often. And when you've passed through this kind of realization and some of the others that I've mentioned in this conversation with you, it opens you deeply enough that you're trustable in relationship. You become a practitioner is someone you can trust. Like I may not practice perfectly in the moment when I'm not practicing. Maybe you can't trust me quite so much, but whenever I'm practicing, you can trust me. And we're all like that. And when you have friends who are practitioners, there's a different level of availability between you. So you can become friends at a different level. And very often groups of people who have been, who've met in practice communities that I've convened have become really good friends, and they've stayed in touch sometimes for 10 years or more because the level of contact with one another and that this trustworthiness, because really no matter how wonderful another person is, if they're static and they're always the same every time you encounter them, they don't feed you. But if they are practicing, they're growing. And if you're growing and they're growing, then there's this rich exchange of what's learned and discovered. And there's if there's this kind of depth in the practice, if it's an embodied, feeling, soulful practice that includes the whole being, then there's just this rich kind of contact with one another. And that's just wonderful. Mm. So that creates the basis for community. And my hope is that people who take this course will really make use of the opportunity to have what's called a community of practice. A community of practice in Buddhist language is called the Sangha. And Thich Nhat Hanh very famously said, the next Buddha may very well be a Sangha. See, it's in a way we are evolving into more profound mutuality, friendship, resonance, what's sometimes called we space. And if you have this foundation of practice, you have a foundation for a deeply satisfying way of relating and being with other people. So this course, I hope, will create a shared experience among people that can be the basis for this kind of friendship and community.
Terry, thank you very much. It has been a delight, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose.